Hello everyone, thank you for being here with me today. My name is Barbara, and for 40 years I was a nurse. It's a title I wear with more pride than any other, but for some, it was a label they used to put me in a box. This is a story about that box, and what happens when you finally decide to tear it down from the inside. It's a long story, so get comfortable. It's about family, about respect, and about the quiet satisfaction of being underestimated. It all started, or rather, it all came to a head, at a dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. My son Robert had just been named Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at St. Jude's Medical Center. His wife Eleanor was the hospital's Vice President of Development. They were, by any measure, a power couple. They lived in a sprawling modern house with more glass than walls, a place that always felt a little cold to me, no matter the season. I was sitting at their 10-foot-long dining table, a slab of polished concrete that probably cost more than my first car, feeling like a potted plant they'd forgotten to water. They were talking about their latest project, the one that consumed their every waking moment, the new Parker wing of the hospital. It was named after a major local philanthropist, but the fundraising, the vision, the sheer force of will behind it, that was all Robert and Eleanor. Or so they told everyone. They spoke in a language of galas, of donor tears, of networking calls with hedge fund managers and real estate moguls. It was a world away from the one I knew, a world of sterile fields, beeping monitors, and the quiet, steady rhythm of a sleeping patient's breath. That evening they were particularly animated. They had just secured a major pledge, but they were still short. $5 million short of their $50 million goal. Eleanor, swirling a Bordeaux in a glass the size of a small fishbowl, sighed dramatically. She said, "Robert, we're so close. We just need one more miracle. The pressure is immense. The dedication is in 3 months." Robert, ever the surgeon, dissected the problem with clinical precision. He said, "We've tapped out the usual suspects, El. The old money is tapped. The new money wants their name on everything, and the Parker family secured the naming rights from the get-go. We need a white knight, an anonymous angel." He then turned to me, a smile on his face that was meant to be inclusive but felt like a pat on the head. He said, "Mom, you wouldn't believe the stress. It's not like your days on the floor. This is a different kind of pressure. The fate of the entire hospital expansion rests on us." I just smiled faintly and said, "I'm sure it's very difficult, dear." That was my role in their lives, the quiet, agreeable, slightly bewildered mother who was impressed by their big, important jobs. I was just a nurse. They said the words with respect, of course, the same way one respects a janitor or a cafeteria worker. It was a necessary role, a foundational one, but it was, in their eyes, undeniably subordinate. They never knew the things I'd seen, the hands I'd held, the lives that had begun and ended under my watch. They didn't know that a good nurse is a diagnostician, a crisis manager, a grief counselor, and a logistics expert all rolled into one. To them I changed bedpans and fluffed pillows. Eleanor chimed in, her voice dripping with a kind of gentle pity. She said, "You know, Barbara, we could actually use your help. We're organizing a bake sale with the nursing staff next month to show community engagement. Maybe you could contribute a few dozen of your famous lemon bars. It would be a wonderful gesture. A bake sale to raise $5 million. The request was so absurd, so perfectly encapsulating their view of me and my potential contribution, that I almost laughed. They saw me as a source of quaint homespun charm. A nice little story for the hospital newsletter. Surgeon's mother, a retired nurse, bakes for the cause. I could already see the caption. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It was the same feeling I'd get right before a patient was about to crash. A feeling of dread, but also of a strange, sharp clarity. I just nodded and said, "Of course, dear, I'd be happy to." The drive home that night was quiet. The knot in my stomach didn't dissolve. It hardened into something else, something heavy and solid. Resentment, I suppose, but it was more than that. It was a profound sense of erasure. My entire life, my career, the very essence of who I was, had been reduced to a tray of lemon bars. They didn't know me. They saw a caricature, a sweet old lady who used to be a nurse. They had no idea who I really was. And in that moment, driving my sensible sedan back to my quiet, comfortable condo, I decided it was time they found out. Not in a loud, confrontational way. That was never my style. I learned long ago, in the hushed corridors of the ICU, that the most significant events often happen in silence. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet, anyway. It was about respect. The respect they so easily gave to men in suits with fat checkbooks, but could never quite muster for their own mother. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my best friend, Margaret. The second was to a man named Mr. Abernethy, my late husband's financial advisor. The plan hadn't fully formed yet, but the first 2 pieces were already moving into place on the board. The days following that dinner were filled with a kind of quiet, simmering anger. It wasn't a hot, explosive rage. It was a low-grade fever, the kind that saps your strength and leaves you feeling weary to your bones. I'd find myself standing in the middle of my living room, staring at a photograph of my late husband Frank and me on our wedding day, and the unfairness of it all would just wash over me. Frank had always seen me. He was an engineer, a man of logic and blueprints, but he understood the intricate architecture of a human heart. He used to say, "Barb, you don't just care for people, you hold the whole damn system together with your 2 hands." He saw my strength, my intelligence, my resilience, my own son, a man I had raised, a man whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose fevers I had nursed, saw none of it. I remember one night, years ago, Robert was in his surgical residency. It was a brutal, soul-crushing time for him. He came home one morning after a 36-hour shift, his face pale and drawn. He'd lost a patient on the table, a young father of 2. He collapsed onto my sofa, not even taking off his scrubs, and just sobbed. He didn't talk about the technical details of the surgery. He talked about the wife's face when he delivered the news. He talked about the weight of it, the feeling of utter failure. I didn't offer platitudes. I didn't say you did your best. I sat with him, made him some tea, and then I started talking. I told him about my first patient death, a little girl with leukemia in the pediatric oncology ward. I described the feeling, the cold hollowness in my chest. I told him how her mother had clung to me, how I had felt so small and useless. But then I told him about the next day, and the day after that. I told him how you learn to carry the weight, not by getting stronger, but by making more room for it inside you. How you honor the losses by using them to fuel your focus for the next life you have to save. We talked for hours. In that moment, he wasn't a surgeon, and I wasn't just a nurse. We were 2 people who understood the unique and terrible burden of holding a life in your hands. Where did that man go? When did he start seeing my experience not as a shared well of understanding, but as a quaint relic from a bygone era? I think it started when he met Eleanor. She was ambitious, polished, and came from a family where status was everything. Her father was a judge. Her mother sat on 3 different charity boards. They were people who moved in the world of galas and fundraisers long before Eleanor made it her profession. My world of shift work, union meetings, and potlucks at the community hall, must have seemed hopelessly provincial to her. And slowly, Robert began to see it through her eyes. My stories became less like shared wisdom and more like folksy anecdotes to be tolerated with a patient smile. My friendship with Margaret was my lifeline during this time. Margaret and I had met in nursing school 50 years ago. We were two scared, determined girls from working-class families, trying to make our way in the world. We'd seen each other through everything: marriages, childbirths, divorces, the deaths of our parents, and finally the passing of our husbands. She was the one person who didn't need me to explain anything. She understood the bone-deep wariness and the fierce pride of our profession. I had her over for lunch a week after the disastrous dinner. I made her my famous chicken salad, the one without the lemon bars. As I was telling her about Robert and Eleanor's offer for me to bake for their fundraiser, she just shook her head, a wry, knowing smile on her face. She said, "Barb, they have no idea, do they? They see the uniform, but they don't see the woman who wore it." She then told me about her own daughter, a high-powered attorney in Chicago. Her daughter was always trying to help Margaret manage her finances, convinced her mother was living on a shoestring pension and Social Security. She'd send articles about senior discounts and suggest downsizing. Margaret, meanwhile, was sitting on a stock portfolio that her quiet, unassuming husband, a high school chemistry teacher, had started in the 1970s with a small inheritance. He'd invested in a little-known tech company called Microsoft. Margaret's daughter, the brilliant attorney, had no clue her mother could probably buy and sell her entire law firm. Margaret looked at me across the table, her eyes sharp. She said, "It's a special kind of blindness, isn't it? The kind children develop towards their own parents. They freeze us in time. We're forever the people who packed their lunches and drove them to soccer practice. They can't imagine we had a life or a mind or a bank account before they became the center of the universe." Her words were a balm. It wasn't just me. This was a phenomenon, a generational blind spot. That conversation was the true catalyst. It was one thing to feel hurt and disrespected. It was another to realize I was part of a silent, invisible generation of women who had been systematically underestimated by the very people we had raised. The knot in my stomach, the one that had hardened from dread into resentment, now transformed again. It became a cold, dense ball of resolve. This was no longer just about teaching my son a lesson in humility. It had become bigger than that. It was about Margaret. It was about every woman who had ever been told to just smile and be nice. It was about every nurse who had ever had her diagnosis dismissed by an arrogant doctor, only to be proven right an hour later when the crash cart came rolling in. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. But it was a different kind of revenge. It wasn't about tearing them down. It was about building something up, right in front of their faces, without them even knowing I was the architect. I thought about Frank. After he passed, I was adrift. He had always handled our finances. He'd sit at the dining room table every Sunday with his ledger books and the Wall Street Journal, and I'd be in the kitchen preparing our weekly roast. It was our ritual. After the funeral, Mr. Abernathy, his financial advisor for over 30 years, called me in for a meeting. I walked in expecting to be told how to budget for my new, smaller life on a widow's pension. I was terrified. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man with eyes that crinkled at the corners, sat me down and slid a thick portfolio across his mahogany desk. He said, "Barbara, Frank was a brilliant man, but he wasn't just brilliant with machines. He was brilliant with money. More importantly, he was brilliant about you." He then walked me through it. Frank had never been a big earner, but he was a disciplined saver and a genius investor. He'd taken a small inheritance from his uncle back in the 60s and through decades of patient, shrewd investments in undervalued companies, had grown it into a small fortune. Not the kind of fortune that gets your name on a building, but the kind that lets you live out the rest of your days in quiet comfort and security. The final page of the portfolio showed the total. I remember staring at the number, my vision blurring. It was more money than I had ever conceived of. But it was the next thing Mr. Abernathy said that stuck with me. He said Frank's last instruction to me was this: make sure Barbara learns how to manage this herself. She's smarter than anyone gives her credit for. She's been managing life and death for 40 years. She can damn well manage a stock portfolio. For the next year, I met with Mr. Abernathy every 2 weeks. I learned about bonds and equities, about diversification and risk management. I read financial papers and annual reports. I discovered I had a knack for it. The same skills I used to assess a patient, observing patterns, identifying anomalies, predicting outcomes, were directly applicable. I wasn't just a nurse, I was a systems analyst, and Frank had known it all along. Over the next decade, under Mr. Abernathy's guidance, I didn't just manage the portfolio. I grew it. I made my own shrewd investments, including a significant early stake in a medical device company that developed a revolutionary new type of stent. Robert had even implanted a few of them, calling them a game changer, never knowing his own mother was one of the company's initial private investors. The irony was a constant private little joke I shared with myself. So when Robert and Eleanor spoke of their $5 million shortfall, I didn't just see a problem. I saw an opportunity to use the very thing Frank had left me, the fruit of his belief in me, to show them who I really was. The quiet resolution I felt after talking to Margaret solidified into a concrete plan. The bake sale was in 2 weeks. That was my deadline. I would play their game, but I would play it on a level they couldn't even comprehend. My first meeting with Mr. Abernathy was formal and direct. I walked into his familiar wood-paneled office, the same one where I'd learned of my unexpected inheritance years ago. But this time I wasn't a grieving widow. I was a client with a clear objective. He greeted me with his usual warm, crinkly-eyed smile, but he could tell something was different. My posture was straighter, my gaze more focused. I sat down and got right to the point. Mr. Abernathy, I want to make a significant charitable donation. Anonymously. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He said, "That's wonderful, Barbara. Many of my clients find great satisfaction in philanthropy. What did you have in mind?" "I want to donate $2 million to the St. Jude's Medical Center Foundation, specifically for the new Parker Wing Capital campaign." His eyebrows shot up. That was the first time I had ever seen him look genuinely surprised. He knew my portfolio, of course, but this was a substantial portion of my liquid assets. He recovered quickly, a professional mask slipping back into place. "2 million," he repeated, his voice neutral. "That is a very generous gift, Barbara. May I ask what prompted this?" I gave him a small, tight smile. "Let's just say I have a personal connection to the project. The key, however, is the anonymity. It must be absolute. My name cannot be associated with it in any way. Not now, not ever." "Is that possible?" This was where the plan needed his expertise. This was the part where my nursing skills gave way to the arcane world of high finance and legal structures. I was wading into uncharted waters, and he was my pilot. He explained the options. A direct anonymous donation was possible, but often a determined hospital development office, like the one Eleanor ran, could sniff out the source. They had their ways, he said with a wry grin. They were professional hunters of money. He suggested a more robust method, a donor-advised fund, or DAF. It was a specialized charitable account. I could fund it,
get the tax deduction, and then recommend grants from the fund to the charities of my choice over time. The DAF sponsor, a large national charitable trust, would be the official donor. My name would be shielded behind a layer of impenetrable corporate and legal bureaucracy. It was perfect. It was the financial equivalent of a sterile field. There's a bit of a debate in the financial world, he cautioned, about the true anonymity of DAFs. Some argue that a determined investigator could file legal challenges to pierce the veil, especially with a gift of this size. It's not 100% guaranteed, but for all practical purposes, it's as close to invisible as you can get. He was giving me the plausible inaccuracy I needed. It added a tiny, thrilling sliver of risk. I told him, that's the route I want to take. Let's set it up. The process took about a week. There were documents to sign, funds to transfer. It was all very dry and technical, but with every signature, I felt a growing sense of power. It was a quiet, clean power, unlike the noisy, backslapping, self-congratulatory power that Robert and Eleanor chased. This was the power of a signature on a piece of paper, a silent command that would move mountains of money without anyone hearing a sound.
While the legal machinery was grinding away, I focused on the other front of my operation, the bake sale. I called Eleanor and confirmed my participation with the cheeriest voice I could muster. "Oh yes, dear, I'd be delighted. I'll make 3 dozen of my lemon bars. They're Robert's favorite, you know." She was audibly relieved. "Wonderful, Barbara. That's just wonderful. The nurses will be so thrilled to have you. It shows such great team spirit." Team spirit! I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. She was treating me like a new volunteer, a candy striper. It was perfect. The more they underestimated me, the more satisfying the final act would be. I spent an afternoon with Margaret, ostensibly to get her opinion on my lemon bar recipe, but really to bolster my own resolve. We sat in her cozy, sun-drenched kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and old books. I walked her through my plan in hushed tones, feeling like a spy sharing state secrets. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring into her teacup. Then she looked up at me and her eyes were shining. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her hand was warm and dry, the skin thin as paper, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Barbara," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "Frank would be so damn proud of you." That was all I needed to hear. That was the validation that mattered. Forget the hospital wings and the society pages. This was real. A quiet acknowledgement from someone who truly saw me. Margaret's own subplot with her daughter provided a constant resonant echo to my own situation. Her daughter Jennifer had recently called her in a panic. Jennifer and her husband were trying to buy a larger house in a competitive Chicago suburb, and they had been outbid twice. She'd called Margaret, weeping with frustration, talking about how impossible the market was and how they'd never be able to give their kids the kind of yard she'd had growing up. Margaret recounted the conversation to me. She said, "I listened to her go on for 20 minutes about her money troubles. And the whole time, Barb, the whole time I'm thinking, I could write you a check right now that would solve all your problems. I could buy that house for you in cash and not even blink. But if I did that, what would she learn? What would she learn?" That was the question, wasn't it? It wasn't about the money. It was about the lesson. Margaret hadn't yet decided what to do. She was watching, waiting, letting her daughter navigate her own challenges, just as I was creating a challenge for my own son. We were 2 mothers, quietly holding immense power, trying to figure out how to wield it for the good of children who had no idea it even existed. The day before the bake sale, Mr. Abernathy called. The donor-advised fund was established. The $2 million were sitting in the account, ready to be deployed on my command. All I had to do was give the word. I told him to wait. The timing had to be perfect. On the morning of the bake sale, I woke up early. I meticulously baked 3 dozen lemon bars. I used the best butter, fresh squeezed lemon juice, and a dusting of powdered sugar that looked like a gentle snowfall. They were, in all modesty, perfect. I arranged them on a beautiful ceramic platter, covered them with plastic wrap, and drove to the hospital. The bake sale was set up in the main lobby of St. Jude's SITS. It was a flurry of activity, nurses on their breaks, doctors rushing past, families visiting patients. Eleanor was there, of course, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, directing everything like a field marshal. She saw me arrive and bustled over. "Barbara, you made it, and the lemon bars look divine." She took the platter from me and placed it in a prominent position on the table. She gave my arm a little squeeze. "This is just so helpful. Every little bit counts, every little bit." I smiled my serene, slightly vacant smile. I said, "I'm just happy to contribute in my own small way." I stayed for an hour, making small talk with some of the younger nurses, women who were my daughter's age. They were bright and energetic, and they treated me with a sweet, genuine respect that was a world away from Eleanor's polished condescension. They called me Mrs. Parker, and I gently corrected them. "Please, call me Barbara. I used to be the head nurse on the 5th floor." Their eyes widened. They had heard stories of the legendary Barbara Collins, the one who could spot a pulmonary embolism from across the room. For that 1 hour, I wasn't just Robert's mother. I was a part of their history, a part of the hospital's living fabric. It felt good. As I was getting ready to leave, I saw Robert. He was striding through the lobby, flanked by 2 residents who were hanging on his every word. He was in his element, the king in his castle. He saw me, and his stride faltered for just a second. He came over, a slightly harried look on his face. "Mom," he said. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor answered for me. "Your mother graciously baked some of her famous lemon bars for our sale, darling. Isn't that sweet?" Robert looked at the platter of lemon bars, then at me. A strange expression flickered across his face. Was it embarrassment? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. He just said, "Oh, right. Well, thanks, Mom. That's thoughtful. Listen, I have to run. Big consult. We'll talk later." And then he was gone, swept away in a current of his own self-importance. Thoughtful, that was the word he chose. Not helpful, not generous. Thoughtful, the kind of word you use for a child who gives you a drawing made of macaroni. I drove home, the serene mask slipping away, the cold resolve returning. I checked the hospital foundation's website. Their fundraising thermometer was still stuck at $45 million. The bake sale, with its lemon bars and brownies, might add a few thousand to that total. A drop in an ocean of need. Robert and Eleanor were running out of time. The pressure was mounting, and my $2 million was sitting quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The plan was in motion. The silence was about to become deafening. The week after the bake sale was a master class in watching a pot simmer. From my quiet condo, I had a front row seat to the mounting panic of my son and daughter-in-law, all thanks to the marvel of modern technology and their own social media habits. Eleanor, in particular, was a fountain of information. Her carefully curated posts about the Parker Wing project shifted in tone from triumphant and confident to something more strained, more desperate. There were photos of her and Robert at yet another fundraising breakfast, their smiles looking a little too bright, a little too fixed. The captions were full of frantic optimism. "Working hard to bring this dream to life, and every dollar gets us closer to our goal for the community." I continued to monitor the fundraising thermometer on the hospital's website. It barely budged. The few $1,000s from the bake sale and other small community efforts caused a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker in the massive red bar, but the big number remained stubbornly fixed: $45,012,740. They were still, for all intents and purposes, $5 million short, with the dedication ceremony looming just weeks away. The first direct sign of their stress came via a phone call from Robert. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the lemon bars. He launched straight into a complaint, his voice tight with frustration. "Mom, you would not believe this. We had a verbal commitment from the Atherton estate for $3 million. $3 million, we were counting on it. And today they called Eleanor and said their board decided to pivot their philanthropic focus to environmental causes. Just like that. Pulled the rug right out from under us." I made a sympathetic noise. "Oh dear, that's terrible news." "Terrible doesn't even begin to cover it," he grumbled. "Eleanor is beside herself. We're going to look like fools. We've promised the board, the Parker family, the entire city, that this wing would be fully funded by the dedication. Our reputations are on the line." I could hear the raw panic in his voice, the fear of public failure. It was a fear I understood, but not in the same way. My fears had always been about things that truly mattered: a patient's failing heart, a child's spiking fever. His fear was about image, about prestige. It was a hollow fear, and for the first time I felt a sliver of pity for him. He was trapped in a cage of his own making. I just said, "Well, I'm sure you and Eleanor will figure something out. You always do." My placid response seemed to irritate him further. He sighed heavily, a sound full of static and impatience. "Yeah, well, it's not that simple, Mom. This isn't like finding an extra IV bag in the supply closet. This is millions of dollars." He didn't mean it to be cruel, but it was. The casual dismissal of my world, my expertise, in favor of his own grand drama. It was the same condescension, now sharpened by anxiety. The very next day, I was having my morning coffee and scrolling through the local news online when I saw it. A small article about the upcoming dedication ceremony for the Parker wing. It quoted Eleanor extensively. In the article, she spoke bravely about the final fundraising push and how they were confident the community would step up. But the reporter had clearly done their homework, noting that the project was still significantly short of its goal with the deadline fast approaching. The article wasn't overtly critical, but the subtext was clear: the power couple's grand project was on the verge of becoming a major public embarrassment. That was my cue. The pot was boiling. It was time to turn off the heat. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Abernethy. My voice was calm and steady. I said, "Mr. Abernethy, it's Barbara Collins. It's time. Please initiate the grant from my fund to the St. Jude's Medical Center Foundation, the full $2 million. He was all business. "Understood, Barbara. I'll make the call right now. The transfer should be reflected in their accounts by the end of the day. The grant will be made from the National Philanthropic Trust, with the designation anonymous donor. They will have no way of tracing it back to you." "Thank you, Mr. Abernethy," I said. "You've been a great help." There was a pause, and then he said, "Barbara, good for you." I hung up the phone and felt a profound sense of quiet. It was done. The first move, the only move that mattered, had been made. It was a silent, invisible tremor that was about to register as a massive earthquake in Robert and Eleanor's world. I spent the rest of the day in a state of strange anticipation. I went to my water aerobics class, did my grocery shopping, and even started reading a new mystery novel. But part of my mind was elsewhere, picturing the moment. I imagined a junior accountant in the foundation office seeing the wire transfer, the double take, the phone call to their superior,
the rapid escalation up the chain of command until the news landed like a meteor on Eleanor's desk. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared from Eleanor. "Barbara, please pick up. It's urgent." Followed by another one from Robert, a second later. "Mom, call me now." Their panic was a palpable thing, even through the cold medium of a text message. I waited a full 10 minutes, letting them stew. Then I called Eleanor back. I answered with my most placid, slightly confused tone. "Eleanor, is everything all right? I saw you called." Her voice was a high-pitched torrent of words. "Barbara, oh my God, Barbara, you will not believe what just happened. We did it. We're over the goal. Some incredible person, some angel, just anonymously donated $2 million. $2 million, can you believe it? The wing is saved." Robert and we're just in shock. I let a moment of silence hang in the air before responding. "My goodness," I said, my voice full of practiced awe. $2 million. That's a miracle. I'm so happy for you both. You must be so relieved." "Relieved? I'm ecstatic. I'm crying," she said. And she actually did sound like she was. They were tears of relief, of victory, of salvaged reputation. It never once occurred to her, not for a single second, that the angel she was talking about was the same woman she'd asked to bake lemon bars. The thought was so far outside her realm of possibility that it simply didn't exist. My silent takeover was complete. I hadn't fired a shot. I hadn't raised my voice. I had simply signed a piece of paper, and in doing so, I had become the anonymous invisible force that had saved their entire world. The satisfaction was deep and pure. It was the quiet, confident satisfaction of a nurse who knows the patient is stable long before the doctor has even finished reading the chart. I had made my diagnosis, administered the treatment, and now I was just waiting for the world to catch up. The days following my anonymous donation were a strange mixture of private satisfaction and public farce. Robert and Eleanor were suddenly the toast of the town. The local paper that had hinted at their failure now ran a front-page story on their stunning success. The headline read, "Parker Wing Fundraiser Smashes Goal with Mysterious Last-Minute Donation." The article was filled with gushing quotes from my son and daughter-in-law, who spoke of their tireless work and their unshakable faith in the community. They took all the credit, of course, but they did so while graciously acknowledging the humble, anonymous benefactor who had pushed them over the top. Listening to them talk about me, without knowing it was me, was a surreal experience. Eleanor gave an interview to a local television station, standing in front of the half-finished wing. She looked radiant, her voice filled with emotion as she said, "We may never know who this person is, but their spirit of generosity represents the very best of this city. They are a true hero." A hero. I sat on my sofa, watching her on my television, and I had to smother a laugh with a cushion. If she only knew her hero was at that very moment wearing fuzzy slippers and debating whether to have tea or coffee. The focus, however, began to shift in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. The hospital president, a distinguished man named Arthur Harrison, became obsessed with the identity of the donor. He was an old-school philanthropist, a man who believed in a firm handshake and looking a benefactor in the eye. The idea of a $2 million gift arriving silently and electronically, with no name attached, seemed to offend his sense of propriety. At a press conference, he announced, "While we deeply respect the donor's wish for privacy, a gift of this magnitude deserves more than a line in our annual report." This wasn't just a donation, it was an act of profound faith in this institution. "We will make every effort to identify this individual, not to invade their privacy, but to properly express the depth of our gratitude. This new development made Robert and Eleanor nervous. Their initial joy at being saved was now tempered by the anxiety
that this mysterious donor might emerge and steal their thunder. Their victory felt incomplete as long as the true hero remained a ghost. It was a fascinating turn of events. Their own egos were now working in my favor. They became my unwitting allies in the quest to uncover the truth, never suspecting the truth was sitting in their own family. Eleanor called me a few days later, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Barbara, we're trying to figure out who it could be. Harrison is putting a lot of pressure on us. We've gone through all our old donor lists, looked at recent stock market windfalls, even local tech IPOs. We're coming up with nothing. It's like the money fell out of the sky. Do you have any ideas? Maybe one of your old doctor friends from the hospital. Someone who came into money." The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a knife. I was being asked to help them find myself. I played along, of course. I said, "Oh, I don't know, dear. I've been out of that world for so long. Most of the doctors I knew are either retired or passed on. I can't imagine any of them having that kind of money to just give away." The search became an obsession for them. The power shift was subtle but significant. The narrative was no longer solely about their achievement. It was now the story of the mystery donor. They had wanted to be the stars of the show, but now they were just supporting actors in a drama whose main character refused to take the stage. There wasn't a family exodus in the typical sense. No one was leaving, but the credit, the glory, the spotlight, all of it was beginning to migrate away from them, leaving them in the shadows of my anonymity. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for a bright, sunny Saturday in October. I received a formal, engraved invitation in the mail. Eleanor followed it up with a phone call. "Barbara, you're coming to the dedication, aren't you? We've reserved a seat for you in the front row with the family. It's going to be a huge day for us, for Robert." I could hear the unspoken part. "You need to be there to applaud for your successful son." I said, "I wouldn't miss it for the world, dear." In the week leading up to the ceremony, a new development arose. Mr. Harrison, the hospital president, had apparently hired a private firm to try and trace the donation. He was determined. Mr. Abernathy called me to give me a heads up. "Barbara," he said, "the firm contacted the National Philanthropic Trust. They were very persistent. Don't worry, the trust held firm. Your identity is protected by our legal agreements. They can't force a disclosure. But I wanted you to know that the hunt is very much on. Harrison is pulling out all the stops." I considered this new information. My initial plan had been to remain anonymous forever, to let them wonder for the rest of their lives. But Mr. Harrison's crusade was changing the dynamic. It was creating a narrative vacuum, and if I wasn't careful, someone else might step in to fill it. Or worse, the truth might be buried forever, and the lesson would be lost. A few days before the ceremony, I made a decision. It was a risk, but my entire plan had been a risk. I called Mr. Harrison's office and left a message with his assistant. I didn't leave my name. I simply said, "I am a representative for the anonymous donor for the Parker Wing. The donor will be in attendance at the dedication ceremony on Saturday. They do not wish to be named, but they have authorized me to give you this message. They believe that true generosity comes from the heart, not for the applause. However, if you feel you must acknowledge the gift, please do so with discretion." Then I gave the assistant my seat number. Section A, Row 1, Seat 4. I had just added a stick of dynamite to the proceedings. I had no idea if Mr. Harrison would use the information or how, but I had given him the key. The rest was up to him. The power had shifted completely. I was no longer just the silent benefactor. I was now the quiet puppet master waiting to see how the final act of my play would unfold. The stage was set for a confrontation, but it wouldn't be a confrontation of angry words. It would be a confrontation of stunning, unassailable truth. The day of the dedication was one of those perfect autumn days, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air crisp and cool. The ceremony was held outdoors, on a large lawn in front of the gleaming new Parker wing. White tents were set up, a small orchestra was playing, and hundreds of people milled about, sipping champagne and nibbling on canapes. It was the exact kind of event that Robert and Eleanor lived for. I arrived alone, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, and my favorite string of pearls, a gift from Frank on our 30th anniversary. I found my seat easily. Section A, Row 1, Seat 4. Just as I had told Mr. Harrison's assistant, Robert and Eleanor were up near the podium, greeting dignitaries and major donors, their faces flushed with success. They were the king and queen of the ball. Eleanor caught my eye and gave me a little wave, a quick, dismissive gesture before turning back to schmooze with a state senator. She saw me, but she didn't really see me. I was just part of the scenery. The ceremony began. There were speeches from the mayor, from the head of the Parker Family Foundation, and then from my son and daughter-in-law. They stood at the podium together, a united front of ambition and polish. Eleanor spoke first, her voice smooth and practiced, thanking the community, the board, and the tireless staff. Then it was Robert's turn. He placed a hand on Eleanor's back and smiled out at the crowd. He spoke about his vision for the future of cardiac care, about the lives that would be saved in this new facility. He was eloquent and passionate. He was every inch the celebrated surgeon. He said, "This wing was built not with bricks and mortar, but with hope and determination. Eleanor and I are so proud to have led this charge, but we didn't do it alone." And he went on to thank his team, the donors, and of course the great anonymous benefactor. As my wife said, we may never know who this angel is, but we will feel their impact for generations to come. The crowd erupted in applause. I clapped along with them, a small knowing smile on my face. I watched my son and daughter-in-law as they took their seats, their faces glowing with pride and relief. They thought this was their moment of ultimate triumph. They had no idea the real climax was yet to come. Finally, Mr. Harrison, the hospital president, took the stage. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a commanding presence. He quieted the crowd with a raised hand. "Thank you, Robert and Eleanor, for that inspiring message," he began, his voice deep and resonant. "Your leadership on this project has been nothing short of extraordinary. The entire city owes you a debt of gratitude." Robert and Eleanor beamed. This was what they had worked for. Mr. Harrison continued, "As you know, our goal for this project was $50 million, a monumental task. And as we neared the end, we found ourselves just short. The dream was in jeopardy. And then something remarkable happened. A gift arrived. A single, anonymous gift of $2 million that not only pushed us over our goal, but ensured that this wing will open debt-free and fully equipped with the very best technology available." He paused, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. The crowd murmured in appreciation. "For weeks," he went on, "I have been consumed by a single question: who would do such a thing? With no desire for recognition. In a world that seems to value fame and credit above all else, who would perform such a profound act of selfless generosity? I was determined to find this person and thank them on behalf of every patient whose life will be saved within these walls." He looked out over the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the front rows. My heart began to beat a little faster. My efforts to identify them through official channels were rightly blocked. The donor's privacy was paramount. But a few days ago, I received a message. The donor, I was told, would be with us today. They did not wish to have their name announced, but they gave me permission to acknowledge their presence. A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. People began looking around, whispering, trying to guess who it could be. I saw Eleanor lean over and whisper something to Robert. They both scanned the faces of the wealthy industrialists and tech billionaires sitting near them. Their eyes slid right past me. Mr. Harrison's voice dropped, becoming more personal, more intimate. The message I received was simple. It said that true generosity comes from the heart, not for the applause. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about money, it was a statement. It was a lesson in humility and grace. A lesson that I think we can all learn from. He took a breath, and so while I will honor their wish to not be named, I must, on behalf of the board, the staff, and the future patients of St. Jude's Son, ask the anonymous donor of the $2 million gift to simply stand, so that we may offer you the applause you did not seek, but so richly deserve. He then turned his head slightly and looked directly at me. His eyes locked with mine. There was no doubt. He knew. For a moment the world seemed to go silent. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. This was it, the culmination of everything. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I used to take before walking into a critical patient's room. Then, slowly, gracefully, I pushed myself up from my chair and stood. For a few seconds nothing happened. The crowd was confused. They were looking at me, this unassuming elderly woman in a simple blue dress, and then looking back at the stage, as if Mr. Harrison had made a mistake. I saw Robert's head whip around. His eyes found me. His jaw went slack. The confident, triumphant mask he had been wearing all day shattered into a million pieces. His face went pale, a mixture of utter, stupefying disbelief and dawning horror. Beside him, Eleanor just stared, her perfectly made-up face frozen in a rictus of confusion that slowly morphed into pure, unadulterated shock. Her brain was visibly short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the image of Barbara, the lemon bar baking mother-in-law, with the idea of a multi-million-dollar benefactor. Then a single person began to clap. It was Margaret, sitting a few rows behind me, her face streaked with tears. Then another person joined in. Then another. The applause started as a ripple and quickly grew into a wave, a thunderous rolling ovation that washed over me. The people in the crowd didn't know who I was, but they understood what had just happened. They were applauding the story. The quiet, unassuming woman who had silently saved the day. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply stood there, my posture straight, my head held high, and I looked directly at my son. I held his gaze. In that one long, silent moment, everything was said. All the years of gentle condescension, all the pats on the head, all the dismissive comments about me being just a nurse, it all dissolved in the face of this one undeniable truth. I was not who they thought I was. I had been the architect of their victory all along, and they had been completely, utterly blind to it. The quiet satisfaction I felt was immense, a warmth that spread through my entire body. It was the feeling of a job well done. It was vindication. The aftermath of the ceremony was as quiet and devastating as the reveal itself. As the applause died down and people began to swarm me, wanting to shake my hand, I simply gave a polite nod, turned to Margaret, and said, "I think it's time for us to go." She took my arm, and we walked away from the crowd, leaving my son and daughter-in-law frozen in their front row seats, looking like statues in a museum of their own public humiliation. They tried to call, of course. My phone buzzed incessantly on the drive home. Dozens of calls, a flood of frantic text messages. "Mom, we need to talk. Please. I don't understand. Eleanor is a mess. Call me." I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk.
I needed to let the silence do its work. Silence, as any good nurse knows, can be a powerful diagnostic tool. You can learn a lot about a person by what they do when you're not speaking. They showed up at my condo that evening. I saw them through the peephole, standing in the hallway, looking lost and disheveled. Robert's tie was loosened, and Eleanor's eyes were red and puffy. They looked like children who had been called to the principal's office. I let them stand there for a full minute before I opened the door. I didn't invite them in. I just stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. Robert started, his voice cracking. "Mom, why didn't you tell us? Why?" That was his first question. Not thank you, not I'm sorry, but why? He still didn't get it. He was looking at it as a withholding of information, not as a response to their own behavior. Eleanor, to her credit, seemed to grasp a fraction of the truth. She whispered, "We had no idea, Barbara. We're so sorry. We treated you." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I looked at them, at these two brilliant, successful people who were so emotionally illiterate, and I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it was as firm and sharp as a scalpel. "You didn't know because you never asked," I said. "You never saw me. You saw a stereotype. You saw an old woman, a retired nurse, someone to be managed and humored. You saw someone who could bake lemon bars for your fundraiser, but you couldn't imagine she could be the one to actually fund it." Robert flinched as if I had struck him. "But Mom, $2 million. Where did that even come from?" "It came from your father," I said simply. "It came from a man who believed his wife was intelligent and capable. It came from a man who respected me. He left me with the means, but more importantly, he left me with the confidence to manage those means. A confidence, I'm sad to say, that my own son never seemed to share." The new reality was beginning to dawn on them. The power dynamic in our family had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. I was not the dependent, slightly dotty mother they needed to look after. I was the silent, independent force that had secured their legacy. They had built their careers on networking and leveraging powerful people. It turned out the most powerful person they needed to know had been sitting at their dinner table all along, and they had ignored her. I didn't yell. I didn't lie. I didn't wait. My quiet statement of fact was more devastating than any emotional outburst could have been. I told them I needed some time, and I closed the door. The resolution wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. It was about establishing a new foundation, one built on the truth of who I was. So, here I am now, speaking to you. My relationship with Robert and Eleanor is different. It's strained, but it's more honest. They are trying in their clumsy way to see me for the first time. They call, and they ask about my day. They ask for my opinion on things, not just my recipes. It's a start. Whether it can ever be fully repaired, I don't know. But this story isn't really about them. It's about the quiet strength that so often goes unseen. It's about the value we place on people based on their job titles or the size of their house, and how incredibly wrong we can be. I was just a nurse, but being a nurse taught me about patience, about strategy, about knowing when to act and when to just watch and wait. It taught me that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one is paying attention to. My act wasn't about revenge, not in the way most people think of it. It was about holding up a mirror. It was about reflection. My hope is that when my son and his wife walk through the halls of the beautiful new Parker wing, they won't just see the triumph of their ambition. I hope they'll see a quiet monument to the mother they underestimated. And I hope it reminds them to look a little closer at the people in their lives, to see the person, not just the label. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gave you something to think about. If you've ever felt underestimated or overlooked, know that you're not alone. And if you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And please share your own experiences in the comments below. I'd love to read them. It's in sharing our stories that we find our collective strength. Take care.